Out in the Persian Gulf, there is an island so red it looks like the earth itself is bleeding into the water. On the shoreline, a child keeps working with her hands, while a warship lingers on the horizon. Along the northern coast, tankers sit in port fully loaded, engines silent, crews waiting on a decision nobody has made. Beyond the eastern entrance of the strait, hundreds of ships remain anchored in open sea, carrying cargo that was loaded before anyone imagined the passage ahead might be shut. This is not a historical reenactment. This is the present. Right now, as this video is being made. The Strait of Hormuz, just 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, a distance you could cover by car in about 20 minutes. On a clear day, Iran is visible from Oman without binoculars, and at this moment, that waterway is effectively sealed. Oil has climbed past $126 a barrel, its highest level in 4 years. Iran-linked drones have struck Qatar's LNG terminal, the largest on Earth. Dubai Airport temporarily shut down after a fuel tank near its perimeter was hit. Every thread leads back to this strip of water. This is not just a crisis. It is a lesson in geography the world ignored until it was too late. A waterway this narrow has always had the power to choke the global economy. Iran has now decided to remind everyone. One strait, 33 kilometers, and suddenly, everything depends on it. Saparmurat Niyazov controlled Turkmenistan from 1985 until 2006. He began as the local Soviet party chief, then reinvented himself as president for life of a state he largely shaped in his own image. And he did not do this subtly. He renamed the month of January after himself. He renamed April after his mother. He outlawed opera, ballet, and circuses. He banned dogs from the capital because he disliked their smell. He banned gold teeth. He shut down rural hospitals and libraries because, in his view, sick people should travel to cities and educated people should already know enough. He also wrote a book, the Ruhnama, the Book of the Soul, and elevated it far beyond literature. Its passages were carved onto mosques, beamed into space by satellite, and made into 1/3 of the school curriculum nationwide. To get a driver's license, you had to pass an exam on the Ruhnama. Niyazov even hinted that reading it could help secure a place in heaven. Then, there was the statue. 12 meters tall, covered in gold, mounted atop a 75-meter arch, and engineered to rotate so it always faced the sun. It turned throughout the entire length of his rule. In December 2006, Niyazov died of heart failure at the age of 66. The man who replaced him had been his personal dentist. Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov first came to prominence as Niyazov's personal dentist. After Niyazov's death, he became acting president, then officially won the presidency with 89% of the vote in an election international observers refused to recognize as credible. He removed the Ruhnama from the driving exam, but only to replace it with questions based on his own books about horses. He built a 133-meter flagpole, at the time, the tallest in the world. He commissioned a giant equestrian monument to himself. He renamed a city after himself. He turned his own birthday into a national holiday. In 2022, he passed formal power to his son, Serdar Berdimuhamedov, who won his own election with 73% of the vote. Seen from the air at night, Turkmenistan is almost entirely black. One city glows in the south near Iran. Far to the north, a single orange flare burns where a Soviet drilling accident in 1971 ignited a fire that no government since has managed to put out. The darkness in between is not accidental. Empty space can be a political language. Turkmenistan has spoken it for more than 3 decades. And then there is Ashgabat, a city that looks as if it were designed by someone who had studied the idea of cities from a distance and decided the real thing needed improvement. It lies between the Kopet Dagh Mountains and the Karakum Desert, just 30 kilometers from the Iranian border. Roughly 1.1 million people live there. At the last official count, the city had 543 marble-clad buildings. That number deserves to sit for a second. 543. Enough to give Ashgabat the Guinness World Record for the highest concentration of white marble buildings anywhere on Earth. Walk through the main boulevards and something feels off immediately. The proportions are Soviet, enormous, rigid, theatrical, built for imagined masses, not ordinary pedestrians. But the finish is pure extravagance. White marble everywhere, gold-tipped towers repeating down the skyline, fountains spraying in the middle of a desert. The streets are spotless because almost nobody is on them. The buildings shine because they are constantly being cleaned. The silence is not the silence of abandonment. It is the silence of control. Nothing here is accidental. Everything is maintained on purpose. About 14 kilometers from the center of Ashgabat, beyond a checkpoint whose purpose is never entirely clear, stands the Ruhi Mosque. It is the largest mosque in Central Asia, with room for 10,000 worshippers at once. Most days, only a fraction of that number appear. Niyazov built it. He is buried there. He called himself the spiritual father of the Turkmen nation. On its walls, lines from the Ruhnama are inscribed beside verses from the Quran. Yet there is one place in Ashgabat where the architecture of control briefly loosens. The Altin Asir market, often called the new Tolkuchka, spreads across the eastern edge of the city in a grid of covered stalls. Here, traders sell carpets, animals, electronics, and all the other goods that spill beyond the boundaries of the official economy. The Turkmen carpet is recognized by UNESCO as part of humanity's intangible cultural heritage. Thick wool, hand-knotted patterns, dense geometry, deep crimson tones. The designs have survived essentially unchanged for 1,000 years. In a country whose exports are overwhelmingly dominated by natural gas, the carpet is something different. It is what Turkmenistan offers the world by choice. Not through a pipeline contract, not through a closed-door energy deal, but through a craft older than every modern state that has governed this land. Foreign journalists are barred. Tourism is restricted. Citizens are watched. But the carpet pattern remains. The Caspian Sea is called a sea, but technically it is not one. Geologists define it as a lake. In fact, the largest enclosed body of water on the planet. It covers around 371,000 square kilometers, fed by the Volga and roughly 130 other rivers, and drains nowhere at all. 5 countries spent 22 years arguing over how to divide it: Russia, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Iran, and Turkmenistan. In 2018, they reached a partial agreement. Surface rights were settled. Rights to the seabed were left strategically vague. and that is where the real value lies. Beneath the bottom sit an estimated 40 billion barrels of oil and 600 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Turkmenistan's share of the Caspian coastline stretches roughly 1,768 kilometers. Off and beyond that coast lie some of the most important undeveloped gas reserves on Earth. The Galkinish field, located about 300 kilometers inland in the desert, is the second largest natural gas field in the world. Turkmenistan itself holds around 265 trillion cubic feet in proven reserves, the fourth largest total globally. Everything about this story is decided by geography. Russia controls the northern export routes. Iran controls the southern overland corridors. China changed the game in 2009 by building the Central Asia-China gas pipeline, and now imports around 40 billion cubic meters of Turkmen gas each year. For a country that exports almost nothing else at scale, China is no longer just a customer. China is the backbone of the economy. When a state depends on one buyer, one route, and one pipeline, that is not strategic balance. That is dependency built into the system. There is another island inside this strait that rarely appears in war coverage. Keshm. It stretches 150 kilometers from end to end, making it the largest island in the Persian Gulf. People have lived there for around 10,000 years. It is also home to the Middle East's first UNESCO Global Geopark, a place so geologically unusual that it was internationally recognized before most of the wider world had even learned its name. Salt domes rise through the land and melt into bright white valleys. The Valley of the Stars cuts through pale, sisal, weathered rock. Narrow canyons twist between limestone formations, sculpted by wind into arches, towers, and strange natural walls. Along the tidal edges, mangrove forests breathe in rhythm with the sea. In the island's north, The old port of Laft still faces the waterfront, much as it has for centuries. Wind catchers rise above traditional homes, tall, narrow towers built to pull cool air downward into rooms that would be unbearable during a Gulf summer without them. And on the shore of Keshem, a wooden frame lifts slowly from the sand. A lenge, a traditional cargo vessel of the Gulf, still being built by hand. Thick timber beams curve upward like the ribs of a living thing. These boats once moved goods between Persia, Arabia, India, and the East African coast. Some were over 30 meters long. They were built almost entirely by hand, using knowledge passed from master builders to apprentices over generations. UNESCO has listed the traditional craft of building and sailing Iranian lenge boats as intangible cultural heritage. On Hormuz Island, there is a fortress that has watched over this strait for 5 centuries. It is built from red earth and coral stone. Its walls are thick. Its empty arches frame the sea like paintings of a scene that has barely changed. The Portuguese built it in 1515 after taking the island in order to dominate the trade routes connecting India, Persia, and Arabia. Spices passed here, silk passed here, pearls, silver, and everything else moving between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean passed through this same narrow corridor beneath the fort's shadow. That was the Portuguese logic. It is also Iran's logic today. 500 years apart, and the calculation remains the same. Only the technology has changed. Empires have cycled through this water one after another. Portuguese, Persian, British, and now the Americans, whose carrier groups sit in the Gulf of Oman. All of them came to this gateway and understood the same thing. All of them eventually left. The fort did not. Across the water, on the Omani side, lies Kasab, at the foot of the Musandam Peninsula. At dawn, dhow boats ease out of the harbor. The people there live beside the strait the way people always do when history keeps arriving at their doorstep. They keep going. And when this crisis ends, as every crisis eventually does, they will still be there. North of Kasab, the fjords of Musandam open into a landscape that feels almost offensive in its calm. It does not look like a place that belongs near conflict. These cliffs existed before tanker routes were mapped. They will remain after those routes change again. The rock does not care that there is a war. Then the drone rises higher and higher until the strait becomes just a thin blue cut between two land masses, the kind of detail you could miss on a world map. And most people did, until the ships stopped moving. Those vessels still waiting outside the Gulf of Oman are still out there, loaded before anyone knew the passage ahead might close, waiting for 33 kilometers of water to become usable again. The Red Island remains. The salt cave beneath it is still dissolving in darkness. In Kasab, dhow boats are still being repaired on the shore. In Hengam, dolphins still pass through the same waters used by tankers, the narrowest gateway, the oldest dispute, still shaping everything.